Liz Truss has gone and the country faces another new Prime Minister. The Independent is calling for a general election now. And we asked you for your questions about our campaign and what happens next. Let's see what you said. Benjamin Thomas asks, isn't a government elected by the people for the people? How can a third Prime Minister without a mandate from the people be acceptable by a country that calls itself a democracy? Well, that is an interesting constitutional question because, of course, you elect a parliament which then has to decide what the government is. But there is obviously a very strong moral argument that a party puts forward a manifesto at a general election and carries out that manifesto. And if the party changes its policies dramatically, then really it ought to go back to the people so that they can decide. How will Truss's replacement have credibility and authority at this stage? Each iteration of the government gets further away from the electorate. The further away you get from a general election mandate, the more you're stretching the democratic elastic, as it were, of what people voted for or thought they were voting for in 2019. And obviously the person of the Prime Minister is the most important feature of the government. And so if you keep changing that, you are getting further and further away from that moment of democracy. It strengthens the argument for going back to the people to refresh the mandate. In view of the fact that the Tories seem completely incapable of governing the country, how can a general election be triggered as soon as possible? Well, unfortunately, the bad news on that is that the decision to hold a general election is in the hands of the Prime Minister. MPs could force a general election if they could vote down the government in a vote of no confidence. But the difficult question is, what can people do to bring an election about? Unfortunately, the only thing we can do is we can sign petitions, we can write to our MPs, and we can generally support the campaign and peacefully protest in the streets, obviously. But Mickey asks, I wonder how the Tory members who used their vote for Truss feel about all this. Why would they vote again if their choice is just undermined by devious MPs? I'm fascinated by the issue of how Conservative Party members feel about having foisted the wrong choice on the country, which ended so disastrously after just 44 days, and whether they've learnt the lesson of that. They do seem to have, in some opinion polls, that suggests that they are prepared to allow Conservative MPs to make the decision, which at least I think is more likely to produce a better result for the country. Could a general election be a boon for the Lib Dems, Greens and other smaller parties? Again, who knows? I mean, that's up to the people to decide. I suspect that if there were a general election with Labour looking so far ahead in the opinion polls, that the smaller parties would do rather well. I think people would feel that it was safe to vote for what their first preference would be in a proportional system. And I think that would see strong votes for the Lib Dems and the Greens and possibly the Nationalists as well. Next question, why would Labour want a general election if they're just going to inherit the same problems the Tories have and tank their reputation? Wouldn't it be better to remain in opposition? That's a thought that some Conservatives are now having. They want to give up and go into opposition because they think they need to refresh. But I think that's always the counsel of despair. I think any political party should always want to be bringing its solutions to the country's problem. And I think the Labour argument would be that they could provide more stability and coherence than the current divided Conservative Party. So, thank you for your questions. You can sign the Independent's petition calling for a general election now. Just click the link and I'll see you again on You Ask the Questions.